Quick review of standard controllers. First of all, in general, Visualforce controllers are Apex classes. They have 3 types of methods, and then they also have constructors, but constructors aren't methods. There are getters and setters. Getters are all about returning data down to the requesting page. Setters are all about receiving data that the user filled out in a form within that page. And then there's action methods, once again for our action binding, when a user clicks on something, or if we have some sort of event handler in Ajax, which goes out and does a call, something along those lines. There are 3 types of controllers. There are standard controllers, which are built for you. They come with every top-level standard or any custom object. Custom controllers are Apex classes that you write. You have to implement all of the logic. A controller extension is where it's also an Apex class, but it's going to complement either a standard controller or, for that matter, a custom controller. And you would use a controller extension to either override the behavior of another controller or to add additional functionality for that. So you might create your own unique new action method and you want to add it as another capability for, let's say, a standard controller. All right, standard controllers. The way we reference a standard controller on a page is we use the standard controller attribute and we reference it based on the name of the object that we want to work with. A page, just so you know, can only have one controller, although it can have multiple extensions, and we'll take a look at that later. Our data bindings, we just talked about this. We utilize the ID query string parameter to locate the record that we want to work with. With the standard controller, we can go up 5 levels and we can go down 1 level. So it gives us a lot of flexibility to access related records, whether they be parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, etc., or children. Now, this all refers to getters. When we're talking about setters, your Visualforce page can only modify a single record type at a time, or single object type at a time. Okay. So even though you can display, for instance, on a contact page, you can display account information, you can't modify that account. You can only modify the contact in a standard controller. Okay. When we're getting data, we can go up 5 levels or down 1 level. When we're setting data, we are limited to the object being referenced in the standard controller attribute. All right, so there's the messages. There's a lot of different options for displaying messages to end users. One of them is the standard components, things like input fields. These have the capability to display field level messages. But there's also other tags that are available: page messages, page message, messages, and message. The difference between the page versus the message is the styling. So the page message is the one that, if you've seen within Salesforce, the banner message, whether it's blue in the case of informational, orange in the case of a warning, or red in the case of some sort of fatal error. And then the messages is the unformatted. The one without page doesn't have that Salesforce look and feel. So there's a number of different options for displaying things like validation messages within your pages. When we want to call action methods, regardless of whether it's in a standard controller or a custom controller, we do that via things like command buttons, command links, also things like action support, action polar, action function. So there's a number of different options for being able to call these. You can also, there's an action attribute associated with page tag. But a lot of these are either explicitly a user clicking on something, or you can actually implicitly call this via JavaScript. Here are those 6 standard actions associated with the standard controller. They're associated with CRUD type operations. We have save and quick save, view for simply viewing a record, delete, then we have cancel, and then edit for editing a record. Everything we've been talking about up until this point has been operating on a single record. but one of the capabilities of Visualforce is the capability to replace list views or to replace the list view pages. So if you think about navigating within Salesforce, we select an application. After we select an application, we select a tab. Normally, once we get to that tab, we see recent records, but if we don't see the record that we want to work with, we usually select a list view to filter all the displayed records. Well, that interaction, that user interface can be replaced with Visualforce. And one of the things that we might choose to do is to use the standard list controller. Okay? To use the standard list controller, there's an additional attribute called record set var. And so this would represent the list of records that we might want to work with. As I mentioned before, there is a list action method, but there's also, when we're working with the standard list controller, there are pagination methods. So we can go first page, last page, next page, previous page. In addition, we can also create custom controller code that works with the standard list controller in order to return lists of results and to do pagination for when we're iterating over multiple records. Here's a very simple example of working with the standard list controller with a very simplistic Visualforce page that simply displays a table. I mean, it's not even displaying links for these, it's just simply displaying the name of the account. But you'll notice that we're using the record set var, and then this is now our variable that we use. In this case, we have another page block table. We can reference the list of accounts, and then here we have, all we're doing is displaying the name. So in the real world, you're going to want to do much more complex things with this and possibly add some additional controls to make this a little bit more interesting. All right, so what is the purpose of controllers in general? Exactly. In implementing those methods to provide access to data within the database or a mechanism to save data to the database. And then with action methods, think about the fact that we're performing business logic at that point. And then also a final thing would be controlling navigation. So, okay. Which objects have associated standard controllers? Pretty much all of them. It isn't all of them, so there are certain junction objects in the case of some standard objects which don't have them, but it's pretty widespread. In the case with custom objects, we always have a standard controller for that. It is with standard objects that are serving the purpose of being junctions that we don't give you a standard controller. So, yep. What is included with each standard controller? We already kind of talked about that. The 6 standard action methods, and then the getters and setters. And then when do you need to code custom Apex? There's really 2 overriding reasons. You want to create new functionality, or you want to change existing functionality. So generally, what you're doing falls into one of those 2 buckets.